Good evening. I'm sitting at my desk for once, instead of on my couch, so you can see my hat tree behind me, where I store at least most of my hats. Tonight we have Chapter 12 from the Earl on the Train. Chapter 12, Crime and Punishment. The next morning, Ida gently closed the door to her hideous hotel room with its poorly arranged furniture. Her gaze slid to the next door over. It would be hours yet before Nick woke, if he was even there. She hadn't heard him come back from his late-night spying. She took a step toward his room. Perhaps she could merely verify that he'd returned safely. Stop it, Ida. It's not your concern. He has his job, and you have yours. This was worse, somehow, than when she'd thought they were parting ways in Paris. Then she had kissed him, and departed clinging to a special memory. This time they'd quarreled, and she wanted nothing more than to barge into his room and create some new memory to erase the awkward goodbye of the night before. Trains, though, didn't wait, and she had an itinerary to follow. She handed her bag over to a bellhop and headed down to the lobby to settle her bill and hail a cab. Outside, the damp chill of the pre-dawn air seeped through the layer of her pink traveling dress, and she tugged her coat tightly closed. The small clouds of her breath drifted silently skyward, shimmering in the lamplight. The lights here were gas, not potion, she noticed. Was it true, what Nick had said? Was serum running out? The merchants she had spoken with back home had said nothing of the sort, but their quoted prices had been exorbitant. Enough that buying from them would mean selling her perfumes at a far greater price than she had planned. And while one of her goals was to sell to the highest ranks of the aristocracy and the most fashionable ladies of London, she couldn't begin there. Nor could she depend on people notorious for hopping from one fad to another. She needed a solid customer base of women of her own social circle, or what once had been her own. Wives of wealthy tradesmen, daughters of knights and baronets, women of the upper middle class who aspired to more. They would be her first and best customers. And to woo them, she needed affordable prices. Alfred had promised her top-quality serum below standard cost. With his position as a valued employee of the Imperial Potions Company, it had seemed a reasonable claim. He lied to you. She'd been trying not to think it, not to believe it. She would never have been so confident in his claims in the first place, if Papa hadn't raved about what a good job Alfred had found, and how he would be advancing in the company in no time. Her father had no reason to lie that she could see. It wasn't as if Alfred were the embarrassment of the family. Ida had sole claim to that title. Her maudlin musings occupied her for the duration of the ride to the train station, a fact which didn't bode well for the 15-hour journey to Brindisi. Every moment she expected the brush of a hand against her arm, a tall presence beside her, or the glint of warm amber eyes meeting her own. He would be grumpy this early in the morning, answering questions with terse, grunted words and downing pots of black coffee. Stop, she scolded herself. She could make a new friend on this train. Nicholas Masterson was hardly the only agreeable person in the world. Ida reached for her bag, prepared to carry it until she could find a porter with a cart to wheel it to the train. Her fingers had just curled around the handle when a gloved hand shot out and wrenched the bag from her grasp. She gasped and stumbled, confusion slowing her reactions and giving the thief several seconds' head start. "Mold warp!" Ida blurted, her Shakespearean curse word giving her less satisfaction than she desired. She hiked up her skirts and took off running. "Stop, thief!" A few heads turned, but no one moved to help her. "Au voleur!" The pounding of her heart matched that of her boots along the pavement. "Oh, how do you say stop that man in Italian?" Even with the burden of her heavy bag, the thief pulled further away with every step. The slim, fashionable skirts of her dress prevented her from taking full strides, even when yanked scandalously up to her knees. It was a beautiful dress, one she adored and had imagined herself twirling around it to show off to Nick. If only she had done so yesterday and had been more practical today instead. "Stop!" she cried again, in a last desperate attempt to save her belongings. Much to her surprise, the thief did just that. He skittered to a halt, glancing back in her direction. Then he tossed her bag into a nearby carriage and clambered in after it. "No!" Ida hiked up her skirt higher, no longer caring if all of Italy thought her a harlot. You maggot licker!" She reached the carriage in time to see the villain disappear out the opposite door. Her bag, miraculously, lay abandoned on the floor. "Oh, thank God!" she gasped, stepping up into the vehicle and dropping her skirts. Both doors slammed at once. The carriage lurched, sending her sprawling across the seats. "No, wait, stop!" She yanked her parasol from the bag and wrapped it on the roof. "Stop this carriage!" Either the driver didn't hear her, or he didn't care, because the carriage shot off down the street as if an army of marauders was hot on their heels. Ida braced herself against the door, staring out the window at the buildings flying by. Did she dare try to jump? At this speed, a fall onto the rough ground was certain to cause injury. Could she use her luggage to break her fall? Or perhaps execute a dramatic tumble, like one of those acrobats she'd seen at the Folies Bergère? Not in this dress. She pounded on the roof again. "Stop this carriage at once! Stop, I tell you!" The vehicle careened around a corner, tossing her onto her rump. Another turn quickly followed. She pounded and shouted more, but when several minutes passed with no response, she was forced to admit defeat. Even if the carriage were to stop, she would be hopelessly lost in an unfamiliar city where she didn't speak the language. She had no chance of making it back to the station in time to catch her train. "Oh, balderdash," she grumbled, not even having the energy to come up with something creative. Tears blurred her vision. She had worked so hard, planned so carefully, all to have her future destroyed by some unknown enemy, for some purpose she couldn't fathom. She had no rivals among the perfumers she had met in London. Her potion plans were known only to a few. She meant to be a relatively small, selective business, so no industry giant ought to be threatened by her plans. Who would wish to stop her so badly? Who would wish to ruin her? She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief and let herself mourn. A little tremble of fear shook her. Was that awful note serious? Did this mysterious kidnapper truly mean her harm? She squared her shoulders. Whoever they were, they wouldn't find her weak or biddable. She would fight for her life. She would fight for her business. Her enemies would rue the day they decided to deprive an innocent woman of her life's work. Another quarter hour passed by Ida's watch before the carriage stopped, allowing her plenty of time to gather herself and prepare to face down her kidnappers. The door opened, and a red-faced driver held out a hand to help her down. Ida grabbed her bag and climbed out unassisted. "Mi dispiace, signorina. Sorry. You are well?" Ida only glared at him. "Where am I?" A deep voice spoke behind her. "Only just outside town." She whirled around. "Nick, what are you—" The question died on her lips, the guilty look in his eyes all the answer she needed. "You did this!" "I'm so sorry, Berries." Sorry. What a useless, worthless, nothing of a word. Sorry wasn't good enough. Sorry couldn't restore her future. Sorry couldn't begin to soothe the rage and the pain of his betrayal. She stalked toward him, burning with righteous anger, her cheeks flaming and her muscles clenching. "You!" He didn't flinch away from her fury, merely clasped his hands behind his back, awaiting his fate with sorrowful eyes. "You horrid, awful—" Words failed her. She grasped for something more, something to convey the true depth of her outrage. "Bloody arse!" Ida swallowed back her shock at her own crude words and slapped him hard across the face. There we go. That was chapter 12.